Hello, everybody. Buongiorno, buonasera. Welcome to our space. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Paolo Frasca. I teach at the University of Toronto, which is located on Treaty 13, Toronto Purchase territory. I'm just having a bit of a tech situation. Just give me one quick second. I think that will make it all better. Thank you for your patience. I was saying I'm located in Toronto, Treaty 13 territory. So I would like to begin with the land acknowledgement. I'm on the land of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Petun First Nations, Seneca, and a number of other unrecorded nations that have stewarded this land since time immemorial, since the ice receded. Downtown Toronto used to actually be underwater, which is interesting. As we talk about stories and kinship, relationship, I really do want to highlight that point of solidarity, building intercultural solidarity between not just Italians, Italian Canadians, but other communities and Indigenous peoples, and really returning to the spirit of what the original treaties were meant to be. And those are treaties connected to sharing the land in peaceful ways and respectful ways, and not in the extractive ways that we see land being used today. I'm here with my two colleagues and co-directors of the Queer Kinship Network. This is a series of conferences and publications, online seminars, blog posts that we've tried to create and curate for the last couple of years. The next conference will be in Toronto in 2026 in October. We're excited to send out more information about that. The first conference was in Siena. The second conference was in Oxford. And I'll give Sylvia and Charlotte a moment to say hello.
Hi, I'm Sylvia, and I'm very much want to welcome you to be with us today. As you know, online seminars are a very important part of our activities together with the conferences and the blog. So you're very welcome to share thoughts and ideas, comments on today's seminars and on the chat. So please make sure that you're signed up to our YouTube page, and we would love to hear from you.
Hello, my name is Charlotte Ross. I'm based at the University of Oxford, where I teach Italian and gender studies. I will be monitoring the comments on the YouTube chat section today. So if you're listening along in real time and you would like to ask a question at any point, then please do put your comments in there, and then I will be reading them out. And for those of you who are listening to this later on, if you're ever able to listen live, this is a way in which you can get involved in the discussion in real time.
Thank you, and please do ask questions, share reactions and comments as Monica speaks, and we have more of an internal chat to begin with, because we will open up the conversation at the end of the event today. We will focus on queer kinship, and this is really the core of our group's work. We're really interested in what are the anti-normative, non-normative, marginalized modalities of kinship, relationship building in different communities. And today we will take a look at my community and Monica's community, Italian Canadians, which of course is made up of a number of different communities. In fact, Monica is connecting from a province that is 5 hours away by plane from me. So definitely a different context where Italian Canadians have also settled in the last few decades. And it'll be really interesting to hear from Monica about the ways in which queer kinship shows up in her writing, in her translation, and in the Italian Canadian community that she is a part of. And I'll read a quick bio of Monica and then pass the baton to her. She is author of the award-winning memoir, What the Mouth Wants, published in 2017. I highly, highly recommend this text, so please go get a copy if you are so inclined. She is also translator of Québecois novel The Fifth, 2021, Italian alpine memoir, The Call of the Ice, 2014, and A Place Just for Me in 2025. And the latter is a picture book. Her graphic nonfiction translation, Gertrude Stein and the Lost Generation, is slated for release in 2006. Monica and I have also connected through the Queer Italian Canadian Artists Project. So I've known Monica and have admired her work for the last 4 years. So, so privileged and honored to have you here, Monica. Please take it away.
Welcome, everybody. Benvenuti from wherever you are joining us. It's lovely to have you here with us today. I'm very honored to have been asked to speak on this topic. It's a topic close to my heart, and I'm joining you from in a beautiful territory that's a coastal rainforest in the midst of the northern Salish Sea on the west coast of Canada. This is the territory of the Homalco, the Klhus, and the Sliaman peoples. And I grew up a little bit to the east of here in Treaty 7 territory, known now as Calgary. And I am from fish and saffron. My dad's people were fishmongers, and my mom's from the north as well. And my dad's people fished the Venice Basin back in the day when that was possible to do safely. And my mom, brought in that risotto connection with saffron. So that's a little bit about me and where I come from. I'd like to start today with just addressing the idea of family. What do we make of an idea like family? We who were abandoned, we whose children were taken, we who fled seeking asylum, we who witnessed our families perish in camps or on the streets or on the sea at the hands of madmen or pirates, or at the end of yet another gun. We who are without children, without status, without parents, without options. We the shunned, the shamed, the judged, the erased or forgotten. We who refuse the cost of blood belonging when it must be paid in soul parts. What do we make of an idea like family? We choose, we reinvent, we redefine. Chosen family can be kin for the kinless, or a kinder form of belonging, or simply a kind of kinship wide enough to hold the breadth of our love. I'm sharing this poem to draw attention to the simple fact that queer folks aren't the only ones who create families that differ from the imposed norm of the nuclear family unit. Apart from the many, many peoples and cultures for whom a broader definition of relations applies, there's also things like step families, adoption, indigenous forms of kinship, and more. And also many queer folks create normative nuclear families and maintain connections with both families by blood and families by choice. So families are very broadly defined here. Now, I've put queer kinship into a broader context. So I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by the word queer. For me, queer isn't only an umbrella term referring to sexual orientation and gender identity. In my experience, queer is also a culture, and as such, it has its own norms, values, and codes of acceptable behavior. And myself, I embrace queer as an approach to living, one in which the status quo is questioned and societal norms are investigated and interrogated rather than accepted as is. And this isn't out of rebellion, but rather out of an intention to move toward a more compassionate, safe, just, consensual, authentic, and fulfilling existence for us all. Now, across the globe, being queer is still dangerous. At best, we experience marginalization. At worst, we fear for our lives or lose our lives. We fight for our rights over and over again as bills are passed and then overturned with each change in regime. And this reality is something that I believe sensitizes us to the social justice and environmental issues also of other communities than our own or our own countries. We understand also the importance of solidarity because we've experienced both the benefits of its presence and the consequences of its absence. We're reflecting on the idea of kinship now. You may be familiar with the Lakota phrase, ho mitakweyase, all of my relations. The late Richard Wagamese said that these three words were a clarion call to consciousness. And in the Watershed Sentinel, he wrote, when you say all my relations, you mean everything that you're kin to, not just those people who look like you, talk like you, act like you, sing, dance, celebrate, worship, or pray like you. Everyone. You also mean everything that relies on air, water, sunlight, and the power of the earth and the universe itself for sustenance and perpetuation. It's recognition of the fact that we are all one body moving through time and space together. So may we hold this idea of kinship in our hearts throughout our time together today. I'm going to share 4 excerpts today. The first is about blood family, and the next are about chosen family, and the fourth speaks to a broader form of kinship. I'll start by reading a couple of pieces from my memoir, What the Mouth Wants, which speaks to the joys and sorrows of family life. And I'd like to say a little bit about that first. In my experience, the joys and sorrows of chosen families are not that different from those of blood family. The differences are obvious, of course, but the differences may not be as unique as they seem. For example, when chosen family consists of a constellation of partners rather than a nuclear family unit, the loss of a partner affects more than just the formerly coupled people. There's relationships amongst all the family members as a unit, as well as those between various subsets within that unit. Setting aside the obvious differences here, we can see that commonalities with shifts that occur within traditional family structures are quite similar. For example, my own experience in sharing my grief over the changes in my chosen family and kinship network that have undergone in the past few years, my straight and monogamous friends who had nuclear families found they could really relate. One of them said, that sounds like something like how I felt when our kids grew up and left home. And another said that it sounds like how things felt after they divorced and started sharing custody. And both of them were expressing a similar sentiment, which was that you're still a family. Yeah, it will never be the same. And so you grieve. And even as you're living within the new paradigm, you grieve. Excuse me. Something just came apart on my desk, which I find very interesting in its timing. Wow. Okay. Ancestors may be here with us today. So, as I was saying, you're still a family, yet it will never be the same. And so you grieve, even as you're living within the new paradigm and feeling grateful for what remains. This was totally unplanned, but my candle holder just broke apart. Wow. I also want to say that creating alternative forms of kinship doesn't necessarily mean that we disrespect or abandon all tradition and what we value. We carry forward, no matter how we're defining or creating our families. So I'd like to give you a little image of the book cover to peruse while I read to you from this beautiful volume that, not that one, pardon me, this one. Oh, there we go. And this is beautiful art by Cheryl McDougald of the Sunshine Coast area, which is the Sechelt Nation. And this artwork was commissioned by Caitlin Press, Dagger Editions, for the book, and it is a queering of a famous Caravaggio, which you may recognize if you're familiar with that work. So the first piece
I don't think we're seeing, sorry to interrupt, I don't think we're seeing the image.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So just
Let's
wanted to
see
flag that. No,
here.
it's all good. It's all
Oh,
good.
share. I want to share. Please share. Come on, share with me. How's that? Is that better?
Much better. Much better.
Okay, now we're sharing. Something we often have to learn how to do. Anyway, this is a piece that's entitled Breaking Bread, and I'm going to read an excerpt from it, picking up with the mahogany kitchen table that lay at the center of our family life, where we had our meals religiously at 6 p.m. every day, and it was compulsory attendance. Meal times were sacrosanct. Meanwhile, in the dining room, there was a very special table that was set only for special occasions. Its solid ebony surface, bare but for a table runner and centerpiece, stood encircled by empty chairs, waiting. The dining room's stillness evoked that of our church between masses. As a child, I was often drawn into that ambiance of peaceful expectancy. I would stroke the wood, which was always smooth and warm. When the sun shone through that bay window, bright rays heated the ebony to a comforting hot water bottle temperature. Beneath my fingers, the subtle ridges of ebony grain felt like single strands of fine hair draped across a sheet. Together they mapped a miniature land of dry creek beds and meandering oxbows, a magical wilderness that could expand every Christmas and Easter simply by adding a single leaf. This table was the perfect place for reenacting the Frog Prince and other fairy tales. At other times, the tabletop was an altar, and the goblet doubled as a chalice for reenactments of Holy Communion. Ours was an odd Eucharist. For hosts, my sister and I used bread slices. We tore off the crusts, then squished the white molika into thin discs and put them into the goblet. And then, completely unaware of committing sacrilege, we'd imitate the ritual as seen and practiced in church. This same ebony tabletop was also used for holiday feasts. We would dress it with a linen tablecloth, brass candlesticks, wine jugs of cut lead crystal, white plates with silver leaf borders, and silver cutlery. And then came the food. Preparations began days ahead of time. We made the pasta by hand. We created the fillings from a combination of 3 different meats cooked 3 different ways and hand cranked them through the meat grinder while they were still warm. Broths were simmered for hours. Sauces concocted and seasoned to perfection. Cheeses brought to correct temperature. Prosciutto wrapped around grissini. When everything was ready, the Parmigiano grated, the wines decanted, the espresso ground, the grappa chilled, the mandarins and in-shell nuts jumbled together in a bowl, the panettone and torrone displayed on the sideboard. Then we'd dress up. The women wisely wore elastic waistbands, and the men would choose loose pants and belts of forgiving girth. We'd sit down for pranzo around 2 in the afternoon. Each time a course was brought out, exclamations erupted. We'd interrupt any conversation to offer tasting notes to the chef. Stomach space had to be budgeted, lest we'd be forced to pass on a favorite dish later. And seconds were always offered. Precarious things, those seconds. Should you have more lasagna and revel in a particularly velvety and balanced bechamel, or save room for the roast pork, artichokes, funghi trifolati, or the extra slice of panettone? Tough choices. Then we'd get back to eating and drinking nonstop storytelling and repartee. All the while, an eclectic mix of records would spin on the turntable. Ramirez's Misa Criolla, Debussy's La Mer, Xavier Cugat's Viva Cugat. Hours later, we'd wander from the table, painfully full. My brother and sister and I devised after-dinner rituals to cope with the overindulgence. Meanwhile, my father would sit at the piano. He played by ear and well, and sometimes he would sing along. After my mother died, we had a single Christmas meal without her before my father married his old flame. Circumstances had intervened in their young love. After marrying other people and living in completely separate lives in different countries, they'd reunited in their mid-50s and found that the spark was still alive between them. Years later, my dad got pancreatitis and was tube-fed in the hospital for a year. How ironic. The curator of so many family feasts was the one who had to endure a year of living without the flavor or texture of food in his mouth. When he began to eat again, those first bites must have taken great courage. By putting food in his stomach, he would have been facing the possibility that his remaining pancreas might re-erupt. Had he essentially decided that good Italian food was worth the risk? That living without eating wasn't worth it? From the moment of his first meal outside the hospital, sharing food with him became a new kind of feast. That first Christmas after Dad's ordeal was my last with my family. He sat at the piano, with his niece by his side and his wife standing behind him. His fingers found the notes again. Drawing near, I made out the tune, The Power of Love. As he began to half sing, half hum the lyrics, I met his wife's glistening eyes. She whispered something, including the word miracolo. I thought about how their love had been rekindled after 30 years apart. I thought about how my niece had triumphed over genetic odds and survived several life-saving surgeries before the age of 3 to be sitting here humming alongside my dad, and how my sister and her love for her had shown me the key to handling seemingly unmanageable things. And I thought about my partner, who loved me enough to let me be all of who I was, no matter what. I thought of all this, and I had to agree, love is a kind of miracle. No matter how much detail I cling to with my words, I will never recreate those childhood meals. The particular synergy of our family then, the alchemy of us, our wit and love and conflict, the wine and laughter and pleasure mingling with my innocence, that time is gone. Mom is gone, and her passage changed everything irrevocably. Our childhood game was ironically accurate. Our table was indeed an altar, and our meals a form of communion. Like hosts, the food was meant to connect us to something beyond ourselves. Like midnight mass, our feast was a ritual. My not cooking, my not eating Italian foods, my withdrawal from family celebrations, these were nothing less than a change of religion. And now we move on to chosen family. This is entitled Recipe. Tasha drops whole unpeeled russet potatoes into boiling water. I clean off the table. Sheldon lifts the book he's reading to make way for my sponge. We're preparing to make my favorite Christmas dish for the first time. Gnocchi al burro di salvia. Gnocchi, a divinely simple amalgam of 3 ingredients: mashed potato, flour, and egg. I prefer them drenched in melted, sage-infused butter. Sheldon sits smiling, gray eyes dancing behind his glasses. I dust the end of the table with flour, remembering the large wooden board my parents once used There are other ways to do things. From still steaming boiled potatoes, Tasha pulls the skins with the asbestos fingertips of a chef. I press the naked potatoes through a ricer. No need to measure the flour. She adds it by eye, just enough to make it right. I slide an egg out of its shell onto the pile, and she plunges into the ingredients, gathers and combines them with her hands into a mound, and then begins to knead. When things get sticky, I sprinkle more flour onto her hands. The powder settles into the fine lines of her dark skin, like a skiff of new snow limns the contours of mountain peaks. Next, I cut away a piece of dough about the size of my hand. Sprinkling it with flour, I begin to press and roll gently against the table. Soon the chunk has become a thick cylinder, its warm, dry surface as smooth as skin to the touch. Suddenly, I can feel the silky skin of Sheldon's biceps, resilient yet firm beneath my palms. Once the cylinder is long and down to the thickness of a chubby finger, I cut it into pieces about the length of my thumb's first joint. When I brush them gently aside, the sound of dough sliding across the floured surface evokes that of naked skin against bed sheets. I sprinkle a Parmesan grater with flour. Gently, I take a joint of dough between thumb and third finger, and starting at the lower end of the grater, roll the dough up the surface with my index finger, pressing only hard enough to make an indentation, applying only enough pressure to pattern the dough with the grater's hexagons. I release my pressure at the top of the grater, letting the bundle roll freely back down onto the table. In this sound lies the distant echo of all the gnocchi made at my family's scarred mahogany table. Each dumpling rests contentedly on the table like a miniature potbelly, complete with a small navel. As I repeat this process, I feel Tasha's belly beneath my fingers. Her skin as fine as the texture of well-kneaded dough. Sage scent rises from the melting butter, and the large pot of water is boiling. I hear hot liquid murmuring, waiting to receive the gnocchi, waiting to transform them into something more resilient, yet still yielding to the tongue. The softness of the dough beneath my fingers, the laughter of my loves as they banter, prise apart the fist of my heart, and the layers of muscle unclench. In the spaces between, I sense something riding my blood, something feral, something sacred. My throat relaxes and expands into a shaft of light. A tendril unfurls, grows up into that light until it tickles and caresses the roof of my mouth like the delicate, playful fronds of a finocchio. I toss one of the imperfect gnocchi into my mouth and embrace it with my watering tongue. That is what the mouth wants, a memoir of food, love, and belonging.
Thank you so much, Monica. As I was remembering reading What the Mouth Wants, I think at least in part in Italy, where I normally stay either with my father or my nonni. I was thinking about all my relations, especially as you were speaking about the elements, the alchemy of making food with biological and chosen family. And so I'm thinking also because you began and the ancestors stepped in by having us think about breakage and moving away from kinship in some way, right? You're also talking about, people moving on to other realms. And so I'm thinking about, especially in the physical realm, I'm thinking about what you think and how this comes sort of through in your text and What the Mouth Wants about the connection between or the tension between all my relations. So recognizing interconnectedness, recognizing that we're all one body, but also the recognition that we have sometimes to step away from people. We are sometimes rejected by people in kinship, or what is meant to be kinship. And so, we also think about consent to be in kinship or not to be in kinship with others. Sort of also thinking about queer asociality, right, or antisociality, the choice of not being part of groups or networks. And so I'm thinking about all of this, especially with respect to your text, because your text also so powerfully brings in nature and different elements together, right? And what the mouth wants. The mouth is sort of the centerpiece of your text, I find so powerful because we breathe, we speak, right? We eat with our mouth, right? So what do you think about this tension between being interconnected between all relations and the breakages, the stepping aways, the willful antisociality?
Well, separateness is an illusion.
Mm.
It is not true. It's not real. It's our lived experience of an illusion. And though we may make decisions to change our boundaries or change the way we associate, though there may be large divides to overcome in our human corporeal lives, the essential unity of humanity doesn't change. You know, the essential unity of all human life and non-human life never changes. And for me, that has been the huge solace and the huge lesson of holding in me the need for making these corporeal separations, as well as maintaining that thread of love, which is what connects us to that totality, that unity, and that we can love people without having them there present in front of us, be that because we've chosen not to associate, be that because we've been rejected, be that because they've passed on to the non-ordinary realms. We have those choices to stay in touch with the love and the compassion that binds us to all living things. So that's what comes up for me when you talk about that, Paolo.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking about the idea as you speak, and I appreciate that insight so much, of complicity as, you know, being folded in together, whether for good or bad, and recognizing that that's just never not the case, right? In anything that we do, right? Thank you so much. Sylvia, Charlotte, if you have any thoughts, that would be wonderful. Yeah, go ahead, Charlotte.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Monica. That was so beautiful. What a series of lovely reflections, and just so rich in terms of all the different dimensions of life, of loving, of being with other people, of how we live with our memories as well. I thought that was incredibly powerful. The kind of the chronological dimension of what you talked about. I suppose I was struck particularly, and this will link into some of the things that you were just talking about with Paula, your use of the word without. In what you were saying at the beginning, you talked about being without kin, which for queer people sometimes, well, quite often, unfortunately, it's a case of, well, they are, we are perceived as being without kin, and yet the kin is there. It just doesn't quite fit into the normative model. And obviously, that's the thing that a lot of queer people have to negotiate. And so the idea of being without, and then that came back to me when you were talking about the table, the dining room table that sometimes was the setting for these incredible meals, but sometimes it was there sort of waiting, and then the sense of being without what you'd had before, or the moments when you're waiting for those kind of collective sort of communions with people of whatever kind. And I wondered whether you could. I don't know whether you wanted to reflect on that a little bit more. I mean, the image of the table is just, it's so rich, isn't it? I'm doing some work at the moment with Sarah Ahmed's really beautiful book, Queer Phenomenology, where she looks at the table, as many phenomenologists have before her, saying, you know, where the table is in the room and where does the table sit and where are we in relation to the table? And she takes the table and she says, right, the table is the space of the normative family gathering, but who is around my table, or where do I fit around other people's tables? Where am I allowed to be included, or how am I included, or how are we excluded? And so it's just this incredibly really powerful image, and especially associated with Italian families and the tradition of cooking collectively and all of those things. So I just wondered whether you wanted to say a little bit more about that notion of being with, being without, being at the table, or being or not being at the table.
Yeah. Wow. It's so many metaphors around the table and so many expressions that we have in English around this. And what jumps out at me right away is like whose voices are actually allowed at the table. And what do we allow ourselves to voice at the table? And what are we encouraged to voice and what are we encouraged to suppress? And I think for me, that tension that Paolo brought up before was really inside me. You know, it's so understated, this don't talk thing, you know, don't express certain things. How do we know? How do we know that we're not to do that? You know, it's just a knowing that we have. And oftentimes I've criticized myself for not having the courage to defy that, to just speak my truth, to just, if I had been able to just be who I was at that table with my family of origin and all of its complexity, would I actually have found that my fears were coming true, that I would be rejected, that I would be misunderstood, or would I actually have found out the opposite? And I never got the chance to find out because I didn't take that risk. Um, for some people, taking that risk is very deadly. And I'm always looking at queer in a large context because globally, it's just not good. And North America is starting to, regress. And we're also very lucky now in North America to have a greater sense of safety and rights protected. But that isn't true everywhere. And it isn't even true if you move from a city to a small town in the same country, in the same province. So this idea we have that we've gained all this ground, yes, we have and we haven't, because globally we haven't. So that table is very long. It's not just long enough for the 12 apostles. That table is long enough for the entire human race across the globe. Like, that's a big table that we're all trying to sit around and listen to one another.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for sharing these passages of your text with us. They're really rich, they're dense, they resonated a lot with me. Not just the way in which you described, actually. I was struck by the image at the table as well. So thank you for that, for focusing on that, because exactly that's what I was thinking. The idea of having a community gathering around, a community enjoying, but at the same time also somehow sharing, like in any context, especially the bigger it is, but sharing ideas, forms of kin, but also different experiences, and sometimes even sitting next to each other, or sometimes not really next to each other. I mean, it's really physical image in a way in which Sarah Ahmed might talk about orientation in space, and how the way in which you orient, the way in which you move, the way in which you interact somehow, talk about us and talk about the way in which we create connections. And I was especially struck by what the title conveys, the mouth, what the mouth wants, and the way in which, the mouth as part of the body is really, it comes as a site of desire, a site of consumption, but also, as we said, the site of relationality. I mean, the body as kinship, the body as a form of kin. I really love that, the fact that you talked about intimacy, or about hunger, or about even language. The mouth is the site of all these things, about everything we do, about connections, about making kin. And so I really love that, the kinship, the queerness of it, and at the same time, how we physically engage with it. So it's not really a question, it's actually more like a feedback to what resonated in me. So it's, as a listener, Yeah, and so I definitely think that there are countless ways in which we can actually think our way of, talking about queer kinship, starting from the mouth, starting from how we speak to each other, starting from the sense of taste, but also I was thinking also the way in which all the other bodily senses somehow come into, and more or less directly into question. You focus on the mouth, but then all of a sudden I was visualizing something more, the way in which people look at each other, hear each other, engage with each other, but in a very physical way, and that helps me also to rethink the very theoretical notion of queer kinship in such a way as really like you can sort of feel it somehow, and that's very powerful if you think about that, in this way.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I'm very glad that my words managed to resonate with you. There's a piece at the very beginning of What the Mouth Wants about the tongue. It's just called Tongue. And that kind of frames the whole thing that you were just talking about. Yeah.
And it's such an argument for queer kinship and queer desire, because if we, socially speaking, can accept the mouth as the site of not just nutrition, but also speech of pleasure, then why is it that, socially, other parts of our bodies that can produce pleasure beyond just being oriented towards, say, reproduction and more basic biological functions are not as accepted, right? And so that's a really interesting thing. And here I'm sort of summoning Deleuze and Guattari when they talk about deterritorializing, right? Different body parts. And now let's move to translation. And in translation, there is kinship, right, Monica? Because translation is a relationship, right? So tell us about the fifth, and if you'd like to share a piece from that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, first I just want to say I'm just being illuminated by your comments from a more academic point of view, from an analytical point of view. When you write these things, you don't think about, I'm actually astonished what I'm hearing in response to this work. It never dawned on me that we would be having these conversations around this memoir. Certainly not within the Italian Canadian community in the diaspora. Um, and I'm very grateful for the different books that you're referring to, and would love for you to share those titles so that I can look into them more. Sounds really rich. Translation for me, just as a very quick, just keeping my eye on the time, I just really quickly will say that for me, the act of translation was what reconnected me to my family, my grief around my mother, my embracing of my Italianità. It really was the way that Italianness and family came back to me, was through re-engaging with the language. This translation that I'm going to share from here is actually from Québecois French, though. And also, the kinship that we have across our country with our Francophone and Anglophone family. And I'm going to move to sharing that image. And this is a novel by M.P. Boisvert, Au Cinquième, and translated as the Fifth. And as Jenny Yuen put it on the back cover, this book gives us a fly-on-the-wall view of the struggles and depth of what it takes to choose your family and stand by those relationships. So just a little introduction to give you a context for what you're going to hear. Camille, Gail, Simon, Alice, and Eloy all share a home, and the relationships amongst them range from platonic to romantic, and they all consider each other family. And eventually one of them gets a job in a distant city. Each of the members of the household goes through something different upon getting the news, dependent upon the relationship they have with this family member. And together they all decide how they're going to move forward. And at the point in the story that we're going to hear from, Camille's grandmother has died, and they're all preparing to attend a funeral together, the funeral of Camille's grandmother together. And they're facing, you know, a typical family situation, but the challenges may be a little bit atypical. So this shines a bit of a light on how things are the same but different. The first excerpt I'll read from is from Simon's point of view. And what you need to know to understand this chapter is that Simon and Alice are both romantically involved with Eloy. Alice's fingers are busy making a butterfly out of knots at the center of my throat over my Adam's apple. She says to me, "If I got pregnant, would you want to do a paternity test?" Whose it would be obvious eventually. Maybe, but your mom won't want anything to do with the kid if she's not sure that it's yours. Well, what can I say? She'll have to live with the mystery. She'll want it baptized if it's yours. We'll deal with my mom if and when you get pregnant. But I'm so curious. I'd love to see her face when she realizes it might not be yours and it won't be baptized. Using our family utopia to piss my mother off amuses Alice, but it's not helpful. I'm not trying to alienate my mother. I just don't want Catholicism in my life. Keeping all my families intact wouldn't be a bad thing. Maybe having a kid of my own would bring us closer. Mom would rather be excommunicated than miss out on her grandchild growing up, even if it meant putting up with my homosexual lovers and my peculiar living arrangement, as she calls it. I imagine the scent of Johnson & Johnson on a baby's skin, and it makes me absurdly happy. And the next excerpt is from Alice's point of view. I dreamed of Camille's grandmother sitting up in her coffin during the funeral service, pointing at us and proclaiming, "Sinners have no place in the house of God." That pretty much sums up the situation. There was no debate. When a grieving person asks you to go somewhere, you go, even knowing full well your being there might make things more awkward. So we're going as a group, as a family. The very idea of having to answer the question, "So how do you all know each other?" makes me want to barf. I'm not sure how we know each other is something one shares, and we're housemates doesn't quite cover it. So now, here I am holding everybody up. I didn't tell my roomies I was uneasy. I never do, and they can always tell anyway. I'm in danger of blowing up in the car, telling Camille I can't do it, that I'm not ready to put myself on display, to put all of us on display in a quasi-holy place in front of a bunch of boring people and an overly perfumed corpse. If I scream, "You know, we're about to get stoned to death, right?" it might be enough to make them change tack. No doubt it would be a completely inappropriate way to tell them that I'm nervous, but frankly, I don't see how I could do it any other way. Here's a non-exhaustive list of things people might say to us at the funeral. "So is that like a cult?" "Oh, a commune." "What? Polyamory? Polygamy? Do you all sleep together?" I can't even imagine having one relationship, let alone 5. What are you going to tell the kids? I can't very well answer to them. Funnily enough, we were just talking about having kids. If we get there late and leave early, maybe no one will talk to us. That would be ideal. But there are reasons why you don't do it, why that isn't done, why I've never even told my own parents, even though technically it's me who started this whole thing years ago. Apparently, I have a knack for converting followers to join my cult. And yet there's something still a bit traditional about my family. And there's only 5 of us. That's 3 times fewer than the number of children my grandmother had. This isn't the first family occasion that's come up, of course, but up to now we've expertly avoided going to them. If we didn't, people would start taking us for couples and start asking us when we're getting married, when we're buying a house, when we're having kids. Ideal scenario, no one would set foot in our house and we'd never go anywhere. So that is the beautiful novel, debut novel of N.P. Boisvert, which I had the privilege of translating, and it was a joy to translate.
Thank you for sharing that. And on the note of translation, which is often viewed as really rewriting, right? As an act of mediation, rewriting. And as I hear you read this right after reading What the Mouth Wants, I ask myself and want to ask you how much of your own voice is in this text as translator slash rewriter, and what it means to translate something that may or may not connect more or less with one's experience and experiences of queer kinships in particular.
I would say that the translator's job, the literary translator's job, is to erase one's own voice and channel the voices of the characters or the voices of the author, depending on whether you're doing nonfiction or fiction. And so it's really an opportunity for me, to play around in a language that I wouldn't maybe use or that I wouldn't necessarily craft in that way. A loyalty to the source text is really strong in me, as well as a loyalty to reproducing the experience one has in reading a text in the original language. I'm trying to reproduce the experience and introduce as little as possible of myself. Where I show up in the text, I believe, is mostly in the choices that I make around which words to choose, which nuances that I'm trying to get across are actually coming across, which ones have to be abandoned for the sake of clarity or the lack of language available. And as far as the particular text, the fifth, there's a translator's note in the back of that text that talks to the experience of having to try and translate queerness across languages. And one of the main things that was happening there was different pronouns that exist in a gendered Latin language like French or Italian or Spanish or others. And in English, which doesn't have gendered nouns and also doesn't have certain pronouns that exist in French. And those differences in pronouns that we're working with now as a way to try and encompass our greater understanding of what gender is. And so that was a big part of the queer aspect of translating the book linguistically. As far as kinship, I found this book really fascinating. Each character came from a different walk of life, had a different gender identity, had a different sexual orientation, had a different level of intellectual cultivation and education. They came from different socioeconomic brackets, and yet here they were gelled as a family, and not having any problem doing that, having a beautiful time. And it wasn't all sunshine and roses, and never is in any family, but the beauty was there, the love was there, and the problems generally came from having to deal with a society that didn't really recognize them as a true family, or didn't see what they were doing as okay. And I'm not sure if that speaks to your question, but
no, I appreciate that. Yeah, for sure. Sylvia.
May I be part of this conversation? Thank you so much, Monica, again for sharing this section of your translation. And I would like to connect with Paolo's question about the role of the translator, of the impact that your positioning you might have, you know, on the translating action itself. So, so you were talking basically on the fact that as a translator, you are invisible somehow. You know, this reminds me of Lawrence Venuti's theories about the invisibility of the translator. But my question is, which kind of agency do you think does the translator have in relation to the choice of the text that, you know, he or she or they want to translate? Because I guess that could be the window, the space, I mean, where somehow the translator decides, you know, to engage or not with a sort of, with a kind of text in which they then can somehow engage. And then another part of my question, comment, dialogic comment has to do with what you were hinted at right now about the differences between French, Italian, or Spanish in relation to English when it comes to talking about queer identities, queer subjectivities, queer spaces, and how, again, the translator in particular, you know, there's lots of questions that come into place, and we've been talking a lot, especially last year we started at my university a course on queer theories and translation, and we started tackling all the problems and the issues that come up in terms of, you know, what you do as a translator, how do you engage with the text, again, you know, what you were saying about how do you connect with the text, which kind of dialogue comes into place, and how that dialogue that can, you know, then somehow be returned to the target audience, and how do you do that without losing too much, without making sure that somehow also some parts that maybe you might not, you know, where do you feel a bit different in terms of positioning or ideologies still needs to be conveyed, especially when you're translating any source of text. I mean, there's lots of problems or questions or troubles. If you want to just think of Janet Butler's, you know, the idea of trouble as something that really challenges, a challenging space. I don't know if it makes sense, but there are lots of ideas. So thank you for, you know, opening up the space and giving the opportunity to talk about all these issues.
Yeah, Sylvia, thank you for that reflection. And what's popping into my mind, and I'm not sure if this is really related to what you asked me, because I confess I'm not entirely sure about some of these more nuanced analyses that you're talking about. But um, you know, when I was translating The Call of the Ice, which was from Italian, um, it's a text by Simone Moro. It's an adventure memoir. He's a renowned alpinist. And you know, there's different cultural mores. Different things are acceptable to say in one language or another. And so the same thing happened in the fifth. You know, there's those decisions of like, okay, well, if I translate this super loyally, how is it going to be received by a North American readership or an English speaking readership that has a different sensibility? And so it's tricky, because it can shift a reader's perspective on the author like that. You know, those judgments from our cultural upbringings come up so quickly. So looking at queer as a culture, you're looking at the same kinds of problems. You're looking at that, well, if, you know, an expression of queer in one cultural context doesn't look the same. It doesn't feel the same. Different levels of equality have been reached, say in Italy versus in Canada. And also, you know, in Quebec, where this text I read from comes out of, you know, that's quite a Roman Catholic stronghold, you know. And so, you know, to the best of your ability, you need to not pander to the oppressive forces, say. And at the same time, you have to balance that with, I want the story to get received. I want these characters to be perceived accurately. So how do I do that? There's one part in the fifth where the character, it felt like a very strong, important character item, like characterization aspect, that the person speaking, the point of view, was really deliberately using inclusive pronoun. And it was really something that established their conscientiousness and their caring about that. And I felt completely at a loss because there was no way for me to use that pronoun because it didn't exist in English. Like, it just didn't exist. We use they, which could also be interpreted as plural, which is causing all kinds of consternation out there. But in French, there was a different option, and it was very clear. And so what I did was I actually came up with a new pronoun because I felt it was so important in our understanding of that character that I actually came up with a new pronoun. And it was something that came out when we did the edit because it was introducing something too foreign to the text in terms of an English language audience. And I felt very conflicted about that. And that's partly why I got the translator's note and I was able to talk about that in the translator's note. So if you're interested in a little bit more detail around that, you can check that out. But there's so many decisions, as you say, in making a translation. It's an ensemble of decisions, and it's, you just hope and pray and do your best that you can make the right choices to be doing justice to the text.
Thank you. And my mind is coming up with a lot of questions, even around the relationship between author and translator. But if it's okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move us along. Charlotte, I'm so sorry. Did you want to go? You go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, we have a question in the chat. So if you just bear with me one moment. We have a question from Anthony who says, thank you for this. And they are curious about your thoughts on the overlap with Italo-Canadian culture and immigrant culture. And are there any parts of this experience that feel unique to you compared to other groups?
Oh my goodness. Could we maybe put that at the end of the talk? Thank you.
Should we come back to that?
Yes, please. Could we?
Okay. It's
Anthony,
a great question.
thank you.
Yeah,
I hope that you can stay, Anthony, to the end of the talk. And if you can't, this is going to probably be online for you so that you can get your answer. But I feel like that might derail me a little bit too much right here. So I want to wait in case there are people who do need to leave at the end of the official time.
Thank you. And Monica, by the way, just a little detail. This is our friend Anthony Portuleza, just so you know who it is.
I figured as much.
Okay, you did. Thank you, Anthony, and we'll come back to this. I'd really love to hear from the piece in Here and Now, Scars. So I think that's the last piece on our little timeline today. It's a really important piece. So please, the floor is yours again.
Okay, I will hopefully get this to switch. So this sharing of screen will take me just one moment. So this is volume 2 of Here and Now, an anthology of queer Italian Canadian, but it's a mouthful, isn't it? You can read it. It's right there on the screen. This was edited by the inimitable Licia Canton, who has done massive work of allyship for our community in various ways through film and as well as text. And this is the second volume, so lots of work there. You know how much work an anthology is to put together. So a lot of gratitude to Licia and her team for putting this together, and Longbridge Books for publishing it. I will read from this to turn us sort of towards the all my relations aspect of things. And it speaks to how we support those we love, no matter what the challenges might be. And it's an excerpt from my personal essay, which is called Scars, and it's published in this volume. And I'm addressing in it my then partner and sharing my experience of an event that we attended together. And this will be our last reading, and then we can move into other discussion. Today, your scars were reopened. You waited a long time for these masculine contours, only to need more shaping. A revision, the surgeon calls it, as though your chest were a story. Just like after the first gender-affirming surgery, your chest is bandaged, only this time I already know how it looks underneath. I'm not afraid of being triggered by your wounds or of this physical change, possibly changing things between us. You're lying on your back, staring at the ceiling. I snuggle in as close as possible without hurting you. Into this pool of silence, you drop a deafening fact that will ripple not only worldwide, but here between us. Unmarked graves were found at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, buried children, 215 of them. You can't do much right now beyond hold on to your phone, so you use whatever energy you can muster to be there virtually for re-traumatized survivors in your community. This is not how post-surgical recovery looks in my world. Please look after yourself right now, I want to say. Instead, I add focusing on one's own healing to my burgeoning list of things I now understand to be privileges. It's not the first time I wonder how you can look at my Italian features and feel love, not hate. My Roman Catholic upbringing is an indigestible hunk of rotten meat clogging my belly. A week after your surgery, there's a vigil for residential school survivors in Mission, BC. I need to be there, you tell me. Auntie Molly is speaking. But you're not supposed to lift things, I complain, or drive on those painkillers. I'm worried about your stitches popping. Even if you weren't in your 60s, post-operative care would matter a lot. Hoping to dissuade you, I don't offer to take you there. But not long after, you text, I'm going. So since there's no stopping you, I pick you up. As I pull your old RAV4 onto the lawn, now serving as overflow parking, a pair of medical masks sway from the rearview mirror, the fuzzy dice of our era. People are eyeing us as we look for a spot to sit, the two-spirit Métis elder and their white girlfriend. As if being a queer mixed-race couple weren't enough, I'm also dealing with my usual self-consciousness at Indigenous gatherings. I feel sure some Indigenous folks are resenting my presence or questioning my right to this drum, or both. I know I am. Selfishly, I'm focusing on my own discomfort because it's easier than the reason we're here. Simply called the babies among their people, these 215 children are only a fraction of the 4,100 deceased on record. And we still don't know how many others went unrecorded or how many will be found at other former sites in coming years. At the bottom of a steep embankment bordering the park, the murky river skulks along. A pair of sneakers slung over the wrought iron fence of the site's oblate cemetery serve as both memorial and rebuke. When the drumming starts, I fumble with my drum bag. The elk antler buttons you carve for it are smooth as bone. Is it okay to join in the drumming? I wonder. An inner voice answers me. Scars are reopening. What matters is the drumming and the prayers. Never mind who's holding the drumstick. Silently, I scold myself. It's not about you. I grip my drumstick as the singing begins. I don't know the words, and it doesn't matter. The songs seem to say, bring your exhaustion, your grief, your love and your rage. Offer them up in song to heal the people, and you will find healing yourself. Now I know you're exactly where you need to be. Maybe I am too.
Thank you, Monica. Lots to say there. The first thing that comes to mind is being in kinship relationship. Interconnectedness with one another also means sharing pain, and that is actually a responsibility, right? Especially in this case, that can bring us to action, right?
And if I might interrupt there, I'm just getting a sense that at this moment there may be others listening to this now or later that are affected by this. I just want to take a brief moment to play my ocean drum for a small bit of healing for us all. And sorry, might be a little loud at first as I get it ready.
It's all good.
And I also want to express my gratitude to Auntie Molly, who allowed me to talk a little bit about her story in that essay. Molly Hatkwa, Gwentarian, who is an esteemed Stratliam elder and bear dancer. And just my profound gratitude that she allowed me to speak about her life and her calling as a bear dancer in that piece. And I invite folks to pick up Here and Now. There's beautiful pieces in there about all sorts of things. And if you should want to know more about this or read the rest of that essay, I encourage you to look for it online.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the reminder that these conversations, academic, artistic conversations, sometimes bring us to moments of pause that really need to be honored. And we want to think about who is tuning in and how the impact of this is so felt, right? I think I was reading recently Gen Z, if I'm not mistaken, is the first generation in what we now call Canada to be completely unaffected directly, not indirectly, by residential schools, right? So this is not history. This is very much the present. And of course, there is the intergenerational piece, which will be alive for generations to come. So thank you for that. And yeah, I was thinking about kinship as the sharing of home, joy, family, but also pain. So when we think of that interconnectedness and the responsibility of sharing pain, of being empathic, and we hear of empathy now as such a negative thing in politics, right? There are politicians are saying, empathy is counter to our political mission or to patriotism or to whatever, right? And so the call to responsibility in kinship to feel pain together, and the plural scars there, right, in the title, Monica, I think speaks to this. So thank you for sharing that. And I don't have a specific question. just sort of sitting in reflection, as we often do when we're thinking about these things. And I wonder if we want to tackle Anthony's question now, Monica, from the chat. Maybe Charlotte, you can repeat it.
Yeah.
More ancestors. Antenati.
Charlotte is just muting the YouTube.
You can hear me now, can't you?
Yeah.
So it just had a
That's good.
slightly complicated situation because I moved space and there are several screens in front of me. So the
It's all good. It's all good.
Ghost in the machine.
So I will reread Anthony's question. So Anthony is curious about your thoughts, Monica, about the overlap with Italo-Canadian culture and immigrant culture, in inverted commas, immigrant culture. Are there any parts of this experience that feel unique to you compared to other groups?
So if I'm understanding this question correctly, Anthony is wanting to know how my Italianità intersects with the notion of queer kinship.
Yeah, and what might be so specific about that Italian Canadian experience at the crossroads of ethnic identity and queer kinship?
Yeah. Okay. So what comes up to me to share is that I believe that because in Italian society and culture over time, family is, as I've mentioned in that one piece, it's sacrosanct. It's family is this thing you don't mess with, right? And there's a lot of mythology around that actually isn't true to people's lived experience, even within Italian contexts. And certainly isn't true for many of us outside Italy that have Italian cultural upbringing. And it's really delicate. I had absolutely no idea how sacrosanct that idea was of family in Italian culture. I knew that I grew up with a strong sense of family. My family was my world. My brother and sister were my best friends. And, you know, it was just like it was us against the world. And I just, you know, of course, carry that with me still, yet having redefined it. So I feel like I'm not any different than I was before. Just on the surface, I've built my family differently. And that is extremely provocative. I had no idea when I was writing these things how provocative that was. How much pushback, how much visceral response I would get from traditional Italians about that, you know, that I messed with that nuclear family model. And Italians are by no means the only ones who believe in the nuclear family unit as the be all and end all. And for me, I think that's the key part, you know, is when we look at notions of kinship in a broader sense, it immediately flies in the face of Italianità in many people's minds. And I believe that projects like this and the types of writing that I'm doing and other people are doing are really working to broaden that. You know, we're working to open up that mythology. Because really, I feel like my experience and what I share also in my work and in my memoir really affirms the importance of family. It doesn't tear it down. It doesn't say, forget family. It just says family can look a lot of different ways, and what matters is the love. What matters is standing by one another. What matters is the connection that you have over time, and that, you know, that is far from dishonoring the idea of family. It's simply making it bigger. And I hope that that is opening minds. I hope that that is opening hearts. I hope that that's making people's lives better in terms of allowing them to, maybe normalizing, creating family in alternative ways so that at least we have family if we don't, and as I read at the beginning that poem to try and say like, hey, like queer kinship is not anything different really from many, many, many other people who create family in other ways. So many people, have lost their families in lots of different ways. Many people still have their families, but choose to have broader senses of kinship. And then, of course, within Indigenous society, kinship is key, not family. Like the nuclear family is not the be all and end all there. In many nations, it's not. The couple isn't central to the family; it's the community. So Kim Tallbear is a really great scholar to read about those types of concepts. But I hope that answers your question, Anthony, in some sort of way that you needed.
I think it very much does. And I'm thinking about the historical pieces around, the consolidation of the nuclear family in Italy, especially post-unification, as a unit of survival, right? And I'm thinking about Southern Italy in particular and other rural contexts, as well as the layer of self-preservation that comes with having to stick with one's family in migratory experiences, right? So it's very layered. And I think there's a lot of cross-cultural sort of fertility here in terms of conversation around family and preservation and not having to defy those expectations, especially in the migratory context. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could interject there too, lots of specifically when you're talking about Southern Italy, the migration that happened into this particular part of Turtle Island on the west coast here, there's a really good book out that talks about the importance of Italian immigration to constructing kind of this notion of British Columbia, right? Like this whole network of railroad, etc. And one of the things that I read was that from Southern Italy, because people were separated from their families, there was, a different kind of community that sprang up because everyone was missing their families and sending money back, was the key. And also the skills that those immigrants brought, such as, their skill with dealing with rocky terrain and donkeys for cargo and stuff was one of the key pieces for why they were valued workers here. So there's the name of the book is escaping me right now. But I think it had something about bread in the title. And I read it
It
some
rings a
years
bell,
ago.
but I'm also not remembering the full title.
Yeah.
And when it comes to labor too, there's a lot to think about with respect to homosocial spaces that were created in those spaces of labor with transient workers from Italy and other cultures. As we slowly come to a close, I want to check in with Sylvia and Charlotte about questions from the chat or questions themselves. And I want to begin thanking you, Monica. This has been, as always, a really rich, wonderful conversation and really, a dance of ideas. I really loved it. And I'm glad that you accepted our invitation because it allowed us to also add some variety to the types of events that we offer. And so I'm really grateful that this is part of our list of offerings now. Charlotte, anything in the chat? I assume not.
No, we don't have any other questions in the chat, but I do have a little sort of question comment of my own. Just I've really enjoyed listening to all of the topics that you've been reflecting about just now. But I've just been thinking all of the some very difficult issues that were directly or indirectly evoked by the readings and by the discussion now. And I've just been thinking about the power of language and the power of writing, in particularly as to heal, and how that is a way of creating kin, through readers, reaching out to people that we might know, but reaching out also beyond that circle. And it feels really important to also to recognize the importance of written texts, not only written, also visual, but in this time today we're talking about written text, but the importance of these texts as a tool for healing, as a vehicle for healing, particularly for queer people, but not only, and that it's so important to recognize that and really value them. And I'm just so grateful to be able to say thank you to somebody who's been writing really beautiful texts and creating more opportunities for people to read, to think, to feel touched, to feel moved, and to feel joined to people elsewhere in a different kind of way.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'm honored to have been able to share some of my thoughts and my own truths. Everyone's mileage varies, everyone's perspective is valid and needs to be out there. You know, as Chimananda Adichie said, the dangers of a single story, we need to have all the stories out there. And so I encourage anybody who's watching this, listening to this later, to tell your stories, your truths, and in the aggregate, that gives us a bigger picture of reality and a bigger truth. And also writing, yeah, it's about connection. It's about creating connection for me anyway. It's about connection in every sense. And we know that connection now, I mean, they're doing lots of studies around this now, that connection actually is healing. So your words are true for me, Charlotte, and thank you for adding that aspect.
And we've just had another couple of thank yous as well for people who've been listening along who don't have specific questions, but just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, thank everybody.
Thank you all
for being here. Thank you for taking the time, your valuable time today, to listen into this work and these ideas. And I hope that hearing them has moved you to some small shift towards something more positive in your life, and yeah, just increasing that connection and healing and love in the world. So we need that right now so much, as always.
Thank you. Thank you. Grazie, miigwech, Monica. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you again to those who joined us and who are watching this asynchronously. And alla prossima. Until the next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.